Hey, film friends, I'm Nick Furman. This is Furman on Film, a podcast where we break down movies with some of my closest friends and special guests. Oh, we've got a big one this week, a long one, an epic. This pod may be so long, it'll need an intermission. No, I'm just kidding. Stick around. Nothing says prestige cinema like artistic ambition, brutalist architecture, and the slow erosion of the American dream. I hope you're ready to sink into stark compositions and moral ambiguity because this one's got both in spades. Friends, it's Brady Corbet's towering new epic, The Brutalist. Guys, you have spoken, and we at FOF have heard you. In fact, I'm getting a little tired of it. Oh, when are you going to have Kleiner back on? We're sick of your solo pods. Well, all right. I read you loud and clear, and the answer is today. It's time. Back by popular demand, the People's Choice Awards Best Critic. I may or may not have just made that up. It's the one and only Adam Kline. Welcome back, man. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me, Furman.
Yeah. So here's the
Hey,
impetus.
let's be clear on this. The people begging for it was probably me.
Yeah,
I was like, I want to talk about the Brutalist.
we really do.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good tee up because I was gonna give you a chance for your open thoughts, and then you asked me. You sent me a message the other day and asked if I was had recorded it yet, and I was like, "No, what's up?" And you're like, "I'm feeling the urge to bash a great movie." That's what you wrote back to me. Okay, so opening thoughts on the Brutalist, man. I think and we're gonna get into this in detail, but I think the thing that keeps recurring to me is like there's the conversation about the movie, like the nuts and bolts, the acting, all the below the line stuff, like the actual film on screen, and then this entire meta narrative on like artist versus system, film director against the machine, and Brady Corbet's like monument of artistry and the whole lineage of film history and the epic tradition and all that sort of stuff. So I think we got to talk about both of those, but I was gonna just tee you up, man. Like what do you opening thoughts? What's the opening salvo on the Brutalist?
Well, listen, Furman, I'm just grateful for the opportunity. I've been in the podcasting game for years, really trying to allow my art and voice to speak for itself, and it's been a real struggle and strife. But the fact that you're supporting and backing me and allowing me to have final cut in my voice and an opinion, today, even in honor of that, I got a microphone from the 1940s just to honor the sound design of how podcast was meant to be. So I mean, it means a lot. So thank you for the honor. It's such a privilege.
Some would say it's your own Vox Lux that we're hearing.
Yeah, so those are my opening thoughts. Yeah, as
Yeah.
convoluted as they may be.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So if you have no idea what we just were talking about, then you have not read any of the commentary outside of the film. So we're
Well,
gonna
and even here, if someone's watching this and has no idea the sarcastic reference I just made, you could even just watch Brady Corbet's acceptance speech
Oh yeah.
at the Golden Globes for best drama. And yeah, so again, we don't want to get bogged down the mire of the meta of all this, but yeah, there's a lot of aspirational strife and struggle, and the voice of the artist and the studio, everything you said. You're like, a lot of that is part of the commentary around the movie.
Yeah.
But and part of that, I should say, and you and I both, we have been to some degrees, and I know we try to keep things at an arm length. I think both you and I now, like, we stop watching trailers, or we try to avoid most trailers and knowing too much about a film ahead of time.
That's
But
right.
we're still susceptible to these things. We're still film bros. And so, and here's the truth about it. Like, even for me, I mean, I'd heard about the Brutalist for months. I'd heard about the artistry behind it, the 70 millimeter presentation, the Vista Vision film stock that they purchased and invested in, the
Right.
old school 1950s cameras and lenses, all this beautiful stuff, really amazing stuff. That had me excited. And again, I try to temper my expectations.
Right.
But here's the personal thing that's going to bleed into my commentary throughout this conversation is like I literally spent the last 2 months,
Yeah.
desperately trying, I trying to get to the big city, quote unquote, to see a 70 millimeter presentation of the film, and was willing to spend the money on train rides and gas money and whatever just to get to a proper screening or to a screening as the director intended.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever, and I just couldn't make it work. And so therefore, and then so when I finally saw it, I saw it on the big screen and saw it, but I didn't get to see it in the way I had hoped to. But
Right.
then my feelings for the film itself sort of tempered all of that, and probably emotionally weighed of, was like, why did I care so much all this time? Like, again, if the movie theater down the street was presenting it tomorrow in 70 millimeter, I would go back and see it a second time so I could see it in proper Vista Vision in 70 mil. But anyways, all that goes into it. We can't say we're not susceptible to this, but you and we really do want to focus on the narrative and the construction of the film itself. I know that. So
Yeah, well, it's like ideally those two things are wedded, right? Like for us, it's we get stoked about the idea of a project, but when the execution then mirrors that, then like those are probably you and I's 5-star things. Like when
yeah.
it's like, oh, I was so pumped about this director, this artist, this thing coming to the screen, and
Mhm.
then, you know, what it is. I mean, it's like it's hilarious because Brady, the dude is so self-serious when he talks, and my God, is he long-winded? But it's like this guy was in the freaking American Funny Games, like you know what I mean? This is like, so it just cracks me up. Anyway, all right. I think like we started with themes, and we'll get there. Well, we started to
Yep.
tease out themes. Just real quick, plot wise. Let me just say, I give it a one sentencer, and if I missed anything, you can hit me with it. But this is a story about an immigrant who comes in the aftermath of the Holocaust to the US to seek refuge and to find a new life there. So, to find a new life here. So, and specifically in Pennsylvania. Um, and I think critically about that, the Holocaust is not ever shown in this movie. Uh, so the whole like all of the pianist dialogue about Brody and stuff is, you know, neither here nor there. But and it's a story about the American dream. It's a story about the immigrant experience and all those sorts of things. But I think that's the actual like machinations of the plot about a guy who tries to get here. He ends up in the graces, sort of haphazardly, of a wealthy donor who wants him to build something for him, and then it becomes Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. It's like a story about an architect and his own unique artistic vision and sort of birthing it to the world, right? I mean, did I miss anything there? Is that kind of,
No, it really is. We'll dig into it more later. There are multiple entry points or framing devices, but as much as it is about a survivor of the Holocaust and his relatives
Mhm.
and the immigrant story, the American dream, the vast majority of the story is really about a traumatized artist. It
Mhm.
really is about the work of the architecture or the architect and his gifts, his passion, and
Right,
his vision, and the relationship he has, the artist's relationship with the funder, right? With the billion or the whatever he was, the rich man that
right,
funds his vision and his passion.
right.
That's really the vast majority of the story, and yeah, that's what the Brutalist is really about.
Yeah, and the uncompromising nature of his vision, I would say, right?
Yes,
Okay.
which is what makes the meta stuff
Yeah.
relevant, we can't ignore it and deny it, because yeah, the film it is historical, it is inspired by other stories and accounts, but it really is a self projection
Mhm.
of the filmmaker Brady Corbet and his wife, who they co-wrote the screenplay together, and they struggled genuinely for a decade to get the film off the ground.
Mhm.
um, and and not ironically, because they are supported, but it's just funny to me that I have this monochrome of a connection or familiarity, that he really did get funding from the son of a billionaire to make this movie, and that son of a billionaire is someone I went to high school with.
Oh, no
And
way.
so Brook Street Films. But but again, obviously got it off the ground and got the support they needed. But again, it's all of those things you identified in the synopsis, but those are really, for the most part, framing devices or something to think about and talk about after the fact. The bulk of this 3.5, nearly 4 hour experience is really about that tension of commerce and art, and
Yeah.
artist and vision, and yeah.
Right on. Yeah. So I do think that like alienation and assimilation is there. The idea of always being an outsider. How do you crack your way into things sort of financially, but also culturally? And it's just sort of teased on the outside of like little bits of dialogue, like the donor's son and things that are happening. Joe Alwyn's character. But that is there. And there's one powerful scene in particular, which I think renders that. It's a car ride between him and his wife, and like the towards the tail end of the film. Labor and wealth, which is not only like a blue collar versus white collar thing, but also um, the idea of like a builder, of the tactility of like the raw materials of an architect versus a
Mm.
guy who fancies himself like an ideas man and like a cultural elitist. But as the film goes on, you're like, oh, is this really what we think it is? And
Yeah.
then I think that's, and then we can get into what you're going to say. But the other thing I think is that there's it's subtle, but there's like little things about sex and power in this movie too.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yes.
the way sexuality is rendered is pretty sparse, but every time it's kind of odd to like discomforting to downright kind of, well, brutal. That's a little on the nose, but like, so, and I think it's like one of the ways that Corbet sort of renders um, these different like caste systems and hierarchies in society. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about those, but like those are definitely there too, I would say, throughout the movie, right? It's not like on the nose, but it's, well,
Yeah.
sometimes it is, but it's like, right, it's just
There is it's funny, one of the original times I tried to go to see it, one of the first attempts, I was actually going to bring my wife and son. I'm glad I didn't bring my son. He would have been mad at me about a 4 hour movie, um
yeah.
but also, like, even though, like you said, like visually it's not, I mean, it's somewhat explicit. I mean, it's just there are other Oscar nominated films that are far more explicit in their visuals this year, but there actually is a lot of sex in The Brutalist, which I was surprised by. But again, it's for these thematic reasons. And what's crazy is that we've taken all this time, however long we've already been talking, just to summarize the layers of themes
Yeah.
of this film. Like there is so much packed in. Like, again, one coherent narrative, but there are all these aspects to the narrative that provide layer upon layer upon layer, from sex and money and class and
Right.
war and trauma and immigration, and yeah. Anyway, so there's a lot to it, and I just to say too that um the film is split into two halves.
Yes. Yeah.
That's part. It's not like we can pretend like it's not.
No.
It literally has a 15-minute intermission
Right.
in the film, and that's part of the construction. That's part of the narrative. And again, we can say this because we would have sensed this watching the film, but then Corbet has been very open in interviews to say that there is a distinction between the first half and the second half.
Right.
And that's probably for both you and I, that was part of the challenge.
Yeah.
uh because
Yeah.
here, let me be clear. I don't think I have been clear this far. This is a great film. The Brutalist is a great work of art. All the commentary and jokes aside, and what I will still probably joke about and be sarcastic about, all that aside, like, it's undeniable that The Brutalist is a great film and that Brady Corbet is a great artist, incredible talent. Um, and that's especially crystallized in the first almost 2 hours. I say first half, but the second half is shorter. And so it's about 2 hours.
Yeah,
The
it's a good.
first half of the movie, before the intermission, the
Right.
film is I think probably perfect or almost perfect. Like
Yeah.
it that like our friend and guest on here on your channel, Jason Tripp. I remember he was the first of us to see it way
Right.
back in December, and he texted us during the intermission, said the hype is real.
Yeah. Right.
And when I got to my intermission and went to get my refill of popcorn, that was the exact same thing I felt, which is like the hype is real. This could be a masterpiece. This is an incredible film. Those that first half, that first nearly 2 hours, it just zooms and flows, and it is a unique. It's not epic in Lawrence of Arabia kind of sense, but it is epic in its scope and presentation and style. Um, yeah, and again, the performances across the board, Adrien Brody, um even I always forget his name, Nivolo, Alessandra Nivolo, who plays his cousin.
Right.
um like again, and to play into those themes of assimilation and immigration, like really beautiful performance by him. And then of course Guy Pearce
Hmm.
uh might even steal the show. Like he's just incredible in the performance and electric on screen.
Yeah, he's great.
um, I've always loved him. I'm so glad he finally got an Oscar nomination. Uh,
Seriously.
can't believe it's this. I was actually shocked to realize it was his first Oscar nomination. That's insane. Guy Pearce is incredible. And the score is, it's almost a joke now, but it's so good. The
It
score
is.
is so good
It
and
is.
so effective. I actually wanted more of it in the
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was missing it at times. The score and the cinematography. So there is greatness all over this movie. And that's undeniable. And again, the real, I only started to question, I only started to find myself being pulled out after the intermission. So
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's, yeah, man. That's right on. I think a lot of the people that have issues with it have issues with the second half, and I think I am one of them, as we shall tease out. Yeah, wow, so much there. No, that's great stuff. So I think I think we hit most of it. I also think, I mean, you said this, but just to concretize it, like
yeah.
art as the artistic creation as the reflection of the artist, which again gets meta because I think this is Brady's like whole point. I think what bothers some people, and I guess maybe I'm some people, is that like you can pick that up already just watching it, but Brady has to keep telling you that in every interview, which is like, we get it, dude. We get it. It was hard. But anyway, so yeah, I guess in relation to that, maybe something new we could say is that it's about the painstaking process of creation, the hurt, the striving, the obstacles, the making of something in your own vision that begins to actually mirror your own image. Um, yeah, and a peek into the ugly nature of the upper class, the obliviousness and immorality of wealthy elites, which comes to a head in the second half in a way that I'll be pretty critical about in a bit. So the myth of the American dream. I mean, in that way, I think it's in converse. This film is actually in conversation with Honora in some pretty interesting ways.
Hmm.
A film that I find to be superior to it, but um, this idea of is this even possible, the immigrants, the getting yourself, I mean, it's obviously a different setting, different things, but what you're running up against and what you have to do versus the wealthy's power and how they can sort of lord it over you. Yeah, and we talked about sex and power in Anora. The sex and power stuff is
Wow.
like much
Hadn't
more.
even crossed my mind, man. I love this. I really, sorry, keep going. I
Yeah.
hadn't even crossed my mind, the comparison.
Yeah, it's right there, man. And it's like, but in Nora, the sexualization is like extremely like overt. And like you said, there's a decent amount of sex in this movie, but it's not gratuitous. There's not like nudity. It's more just sort of these like tidbits of scenes that are weird and out of place. Um, okay, so I think that's a lot,
I
but
mean, that, just to pause there for a second, because it's hilarious. Again, I don't even know why it had never crossed my mind, but just that as of today, when we're recording, which is February 11th,
yeah.
Honora and The Brutalist are the front runners for Best Picture at the Oscars, which are in less than a month.
Right.
And it hadn't even crossed my mind all those similarities you identified. In addition to, there's actually similarities in the construction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Where the different halves or the different parts,
Yeah.
that there's different tones and genres that work in both Nora and the Brutalist.
Yes.
I think,
Structure.
and
Yeah.
I'll just say that I think, and here's maybe we can start to dive into the challenges with the Brutalist. In Nora, never once did that take me out of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
The jumps or the transitions from act 1, 2, and 3 in Nora, and the again, the tonal or the
Right.
genre differences, it flows and it
Right.
moves,
Exactly. For me,
and
it does. For me
and it
too.
keeps you engaged. In the Brutalist, to me, it's quite abrupt
Mm-hmm.
and disengaging. Again, it doesn't lose the masterful
Right.
work that is integral to all of it, but I'll just say this, that like, again, you've already started to identify it, but in the second act, if there was anything subtle in the first half of the Brutals, which maybe there isn't, but whatever might have been not explicitly identified and called out thematically, it then becomes literal, repeated, and in your face
That's right.
in the second half. And
Boom.
here's the one film I thought of, which is just because I had watched it a few days before seeing the Brutalist. It's not a great film, but I happened to watch Amy Adams and Night Bitch a few nights
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
seeing, and it's a good film. It's not a great film,
Right.
but that film is my review was simply, nothing has been more metaphorically literal than this film.
Yeah.
Like, Night Bitch is metaphorically literal,
Right.
and
Right. Right.
that was honestly what at moments was going through my mind watching the second half of the Brutalist,
Yes.
of like
Exactly. Yeah.
it's just hitting you over the head with the literalism of the thematics that were laid down in the architecture of the film, like in
Mhm.
the first half, and it really kind of hits you over the head of it, and it's just too much. And here's the thing: is that, again, I had suspicions, and then sadly they were confirmed by things that Brady has said in interviews. But I can respect. I love bold choices. I love big swings. I love a director just being unhindered in their vision and where this thing has to go.
Mhm.
But where those things became explicit and melodramatic and over the top in the second half of the Brutalist, I was constantly questioning it. It didn't feel natural with the first half of the film.
Mhm.
And and again, I can respect the construction, I can respect the choices, but sadly, none of those choices made sense to me narratively. None of
Mm.
those choices in the second half of the film seem to flow out of the foundational pieces that were laid, the groundwork that was laid in the first half of the film. And sadly, I heard Brady say this in an interview, which was, no, I made choices in the second half to make it different and set it apart from the first half, because that's what great films do.
Mm.
And like, I got angry, like, and I'm paraphrasing his words, but I got angry listening to him say that in this interview on this podcast, because I'm like,
Yeah.
that choice can be great if
Mhm.
it makes sense within the internal logic of the narrative. But
Right.
you're admitting that you made these choices just because that's what great films
Right.
historically
Right.
have
Right. Right.
done. And I'm like, that is ridiculous. That is self-involved and self-righteous and
Yeah.
just ridiculous. And again, it doesn't take away from the fact that I was still watching a great film and enjoying, generally overall, the experience. But then to come back and to walk out of the film and think about, like, why did I not love the second half? As like, why
Right.
did I get what was the reason for these choices that they embellished and magnetized the themes of the first half? And then to hear him say, well, I just did it because that's what I think a great film would have to do,
Right.
rather than, this is where the narrative took me, this is where the characters led us as we wrote the screenplay. That's not what he did. And that really just bums me out. It's just very disappointing.
Yeah, wow, that's I didn't run into it, but that yet, but that is like that's a powerful thing to think about because yeah, man, and this is what I'm saying. Like well, I have two thoughts based on that. No, thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. So I have two thoughts that I really vibe with what you're saying because the first is that like that's what I mean when I say I'm bothered by the meta stuff, which is like it's like he's trying to say this is the Godfather. This is an Antonian. This is Lawrence of Arabia. Like put me in this tradition. And it's like just make a great film, man. Like you don't have to like
Yeah.
it's do ex machina. Like you don't have to step in and do this stuff. Like I mean, you guys know in our thread, I'm very fond of quoting Stephen King, who I love. But he wrote a book on writing that's phenomenal. And like one of the big things he writes about is how do you write good fiction? It's you follow the characters. Like
Yes.
when the characters actually begin to take on a life of their own in your imagination, and you just like, why did this happen in the Dark Tower series? It's like, well, that's what Roland would do. Like that's what would happen. It's like he's just like the guy who's putting down what these characters are actually doing. Now, again, that gets a little highfalutin, but like that idea is the same, which is that like what if you bring these characters to life, what how would they actually act, right? um I want to actually dig into the specifics of that, but maybe we can just like tuck that down because like specifically one action by Guy Pearce in the third act is like
It's
just
I
just
literally moaned. I
yeah,
literally
are you
moaned.
kidding me?
Yeah.
There's just other like little things where, like you said, man, like I think that's what I really bumped up against, where it was just like you're literalizing things that you were only sort of hinting at before.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so let's go there in a sec. I do want to mention one thing, like brutalist architecture. I find that interesting too, because like one
Yeah.
of the big themes we haven't said is like I wanted to just like shout that when the mic came on, it was just gonna be like form follows function, you know, like that the idea of like building these things with using building materials like concrete that are less expensive and it's all about like things that last. The
Yeah.
machine his he described his designs as machines with no superfluous parts, and then they
Mm.
held this core of beauty. So the architecture becomes the metaphor for the goals of the film itself, art imitating life, like all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think that excuse me. I think that's all there.
Yeah.
And let's see. I think we hit yeah, he wants us to
And that's really, I mean, that's again, that's the heart of the film. That's the bulk of the narrative. That's
Mhm.
what is awe-inspiring
Right.
to watch, is going from the vision. I mean, seeing this human being, this artist, come from trauma, find his way, um, hit rock bottom, be lifted up, be recognized as an artist and his talent, be given be given the funding and the platform, and then to see him fight his way and oversee the construction of this monument of a building, and and wrestle with the other, you know, contractors and other architects and all,
Right.
like all of that was so compelling and so exciting to
Right.
see. And even having Guy Pearce's explosive, the
Right.
character's explosive personality, like to go off the hinges, was really actually entertaining, but also again evocative through the course of that.
Mhm.
um but then there's all these other scenes and all these other moments and all these other characters, and it like it doesn't quite coalesce in the end.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think also like the overture, the intermission, the epilogue, the chapter structure, those are all ways that you're announcing how big this is to people,
Yes.
right? If you want to look at it kindly, it's like saying,
Yes.
see, I'm aligning myself with a, you know, a performance, a filmic, historical, epic tradition.
Yep.
And then, but if you're unkind, it's, yeah, it's Will Ferrell. Like, I'm kind of a big deal, aren't I? You know, like it's like that's it. I do want to talk about
Don't know how to say this,
I don't know
but
how to say this. So,
I'm kind of a big deal.
kind
And
of a
again, like those are great things to aspire for. And again,
sure.
in the first 2 hours, it actually works because it's just there and it's not front and center.
Right.
But then for whatever reason in the second half, well, we couldn't, I guess we know his reasons, but he takes all those things that aren't front and center and just shoves them to the front of the stage, to the front of the screen. And it takes you, it's, this is a nitpick, but I don't know, maybe this caught you off. The overture, like, it literally comes on screens and says overture, and
Mhm.
we're listening to this beautiful score begin to build. But then the overture like lasts like 60 seconds, and then the film just starts, which
Mhm.
traditionally overtures are minutes.
Yeah.
And so I know, again, that's a nitpick, and that just threw me off right as the film started, because it was like, oh, I gotta sit back and relax and let the music wash over me. And then the camera just cut, and then the camera just, the scene cuts to the first scene. I was like,
Mhm.
well, overtures are traditionally a lot longer than
Yeah.
30 to 60 seconds. Anyways, nitpick. But
Yeah.
now we
So
haven't mentioned, so okay, so let's get down to,
yeah, let's do some brass tacks because I do think there's some good stuff.
we've identified Brady. I have a question for you.
Mhm.
And in Brady, I mean, Brady, and his wife Mona, the co-writer, like, it rests on them. Like, if we are to point blame of the choices we didn't like or didn't connect with. However, the question is the one character we haven't identified. Actually, there's two characters we haven't identified, but one is Adrien Brody's wife,
Yes.
played by Felicity
Jones. Yep.
Jones.
Yep.
And we only meet her.
Right.
We hear of her, and letters are written in the first half,
For
but she
sure.
doesn't get on screen until that second half,
So the second half, yeah.
and that's really the start of the second half after the intermission. Do
And then
you think Felicity also bears some of the brunt of the blame for what is lost in the second half, or do you think she was fine?
yeah, it's a good question. I wrestled with it. I mean, one of the podcasts, a couple of the podcasts that you and I are familiar with, like some of them, people were hammering her performance, and man, like it wasn't. Her performance didn't bother me. I didn't find her like here contrast. Selena Gomez and Amelia Perez, a film I
Mm,
do not, a film I do not at all love, and I have all sorts of issues with the messaging around it. Um, but like she is in a different movie than everybody else in that movie, in my opinion. Uh,
yeah.
a lesser movie uh, to an already, yeah. Anyway, she's not good, and I said that in my review. This,
Right.
I don't feel like she hurts this movie. If you want to take her to task for her accent or like
Right.
that she doesn't have the depth of range, because I did one of the things we praised the score. I do want to go back and praise the writing because there's amazing things about the writing in
Yeah.
this movie. And the performance. I mean, I think they're like Guy Pearce is very stentorian and out there, and he's a blowhard, but his performance is incredible. Like you said, he steals it. Brody, it's interior, it's what's held back, it's his face, it's that again, awesome. So is she them? No. And that has, by the way, that's not sexist. It has nothing to do with the film. I don't, I mean, or with their gender. I just think that she has a lesser part.
Yeah.
But she has her moments too. She has her powerful moments too. I do think she sort of suffers from some of the like Nolan, not the dead wife problem, but she's just a, she's like a minor character in a great man saga. And I think
Right.
that
Yes.
makes it harder for her to like break in. But like, is that her fault or is that more a product of the story that's being told and the writing and all that sort of stuff? Like, you get these little hints that she is really smart, like
Hmm.
smarter than him. There's some awesome, like at the beginning of the
Yeah.
second, there's some
Yeah.
awesome like blue collar stuff where like Pearce is throwing jabs at Brody for being sort of a brilliant artist, but like blue collar. And then she's actually picking it up and defending it because she's so intelligent. But that leads her to a path of writing where she's basically like writing like stupid stuff for makeup ads or something, like stuff way below her station.
Right.
But
Right.
you don't get a lot of that. So it's like there's just not a lot of characterization for her.
Yeah.
Um, so do I think she should have been Oscar nominated? I don't know, man. Like
Yeah. I forgot about that.
I'm open to like dialogue about that, but I did not think she was like bad or
Right.
I don't think
I
she
can I can easily, I like Felicity Jones as an actress in
too.
general. but she's had great performances and great films. Um, the truth is, I could imagine a better performance. That's
Agreed.
the only challenge.
Yeah,
But I
agreed.
agree with you that I don't think it actually weighs down or deters. I really don't. I really don't think it's right to point the blame there, because again, there's just and that the writing changes. Like the writing just changes in the
Right.
second half, and that's where I'll also identify the other character, the other second character that's important, especially in the second half, is the niece, the adopted daughter, who is Sophia? What's her name?
Yeah.
Jofia.
Yeah.
Jofia.
Yeah.
And so the adopted daughter, the niece, um, a couple of things. I think her presence is great in the film,
Right.
and that's a performance I actually really love.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but two things that are just again took me out of it, and even as I look back now, I don't quite understand. One, for that second, for like whatever the first hour that she's on screen, I don't think she utters a single word.
Right.
Maybe she whispers something, but she doesn't. She's almost mute, and there's even commentary about her being mute or almost mute. And then we jump, and then after like an hour on screen, and this is the second half of the film, it cuts ahead like 7 years or something, and they're at a dinner table together, and she's just talking it up, like she's
Awesome.
just chatting away. And I'm like, wait, what did we lose? What did we miss in the progression of that character, or the
Right.
motivations behind, like, okay, now she's married, now she's pregnant, now she's moving to Israel, and she's just chatting away. And I'm like, what? Like it was so jarring and odd. And it's again, and that would be fine if there was resolution, explanation, or whatever. The only explanation possibly is that in addition to all the thematic layers we've talked about, she is actually she is the actual framing device for the entire film.
Yeah.
This young woman is the first shot and the last shot.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if and it's so it's through her lens of this almost third party observation of her aunt and her uncle and their journey and their trauma and their art and their immigration story, and and it's being told through her eyes because she is a survivor of the Holocaust. She lost family and was adopted by them and was starting a new life.
She's also the key player in the epilogue too. I mean,
And in the epilogue, which is like maybe 10 minutes or something, like she's
right.
the voice
She's the
and the
voice.
performance, the carrying it. And as I describe all of that, that sounds amazing to me. That sounds like such a genius way of writing and constructing this epic. And yet you get to the end and you see that last shot and you're like, oh yeah, huh? Wait, why?
Yeah.
Like she's because she's barely given any focus
Mm-hmm.
in 3.5 hours
Mm-hmm.
until the end. You basically forget that the film starts with her writing a diary or a journal or a letter, and then 3.5 hours later we return to her and she's speaking and she's talking about her uncle and his greatness. And that and the big quote, right, the thesis apparently is that it's not about the journey, it's the destination.
Right.
I'm like, okay, but
Again.
now you just like confused me, because like now I just like I'm like, none of this impacts me, none of this hits me,
Right.
because you haven't properly prepared me or given the through line. So anyways, that's the other character.
So that's like that as another theme, like the idea it's the destination, not the journey, is the flip side of what we usually hear, which is it's the journey, not the
Mm-hmm.
destination, which is to say that like it's the art at the end that stands. That's what matters. The product, it gets meta again, both for him as the architect, Toth as the architect, but also for Corbet's thing going along. So it sort of flips that on his head, and it's like, well, what stand again? It's like this needs to be an epic. Okay, wait. So let's do this. If I'm gonna put the full spoiler bumper in order to respond to what you just said. Okay. So, so for that, if you want nothing spoiled about the third act, that's what we're about to.
Why have you been watching or listening to
Yeah,
this?
yeah, 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 yeah. Watch it, come back. So okay, wait. I do want to say something positive about the writing before we do this third act because I know we got just a few minutes left here. I just especially in that first part. I can't remember the last time I watched a movie and it was like every single scene, each line of dialogue was near perfect. Like it's
Mm,
215-minute movie with like no filler, no missteps in terms of the writing. And part of that is probably because a lot of the vernacular is like affected and slow and drawn out. But everything is also like tight and structured to within an inch of its life. I mean, there's no room for playfulness or random deviation. So depending on how you feel about screenplays, like if you love weird like excursions with Scorsese or PTA or something, that could be a pro or a con. But they basically, and Corbet said, they shot the exact movie they wrote. There's no
right.
ad libbing. It's airtight. And even love, like you were talking about Alessandro Nivola's, like, I love how there's certain plot threads, they pick them up and then they just drop them. Like kind of
Yeah.
real life. Like the
Yep.
screenwriters never felt a burden to answer or beholden to answer every question that they raised. So I just want to say that before we bump into like to conclude with this third act analysis. I think this is a phenomenally written work, at least for the majority of its runtime, right? And
Yep.
even when it gets into like weird plot machinations, which we're about to say, um, it's still well penned. Like the whole thing is still really well written. I think that's probably and that and the performances are its best asset. So, okay, here's the thing about Jofia's character is it's so weird. Like, okay, when you meet Felicity Jones' character, she's in a wheelchair. And the idea is that because she suffered through this fandom and the famine in these camps, she can't walk. So I thought that the assumption, unstated, was that Jofia's gone mute because of like malnourishment, essentially. But then
Mm,
you fast forward and she's sitting at the table, and we get this sort of Zionist plot thread, which is like
yeah.
returning to Israel for Jews. Like that's something we haven't even talked about, and then she's talking, and then Erzsébet, Jones' character, can't walk, and then all of a sudden in the last scene, she's walking. So it's like, I mean, not well, but she's walking with a walker. And I mean, she was wheelchair bound. So it almost, and then we get this epilogue where Zofia's character is, it's the very first thing they shot, and they shot it during COVID. That's how they got St. Mark's Cathedral, Corbet said,
Hmm.
in Venice. That's how they got all of that with nobody on site, is because it was shot during COVID. And I think it's like he shot it first and wanted to stick it into the end to the movie, but that whole thing almost renders it like dreamlike too. Like she's praising this guy. So I'm like, is the third act supposed to be like all in somebody's head? Because like you said, the problem is none of this is announced from the characters, right? And we get that Pearce is like a blowhard and a dick, but he literally rapes Brody in the third act. Like, can you get any more fucking on the nose? Like, it's just, I don't know, man. Like, that's the stuff where I'm going, you had written something so airtight, and now you've
Yeah.
got characters just doing all kinds of weird shit. And
Yeah.
I get it. You could say that you followed the logical end. Would Guy Pearce rape him? Maybe, but like, and was he like, but it's just a physical actualization of the power dynamics we already knew existed subtly in the film. So
Yeah.
it just messes with you, man.
Yeah.
All right, I'm done. That's diatribe over. That's my diatribe on the third act. Like, I don't, you have
Well,
closing.
we can end there if you want and wrap it up, because like again, I don't even know what to make of the epilogue, to be honest. I it I was so disconnected, or yeah, just confused by that point, that I was like, sure, 80s theme, and it's they've recast now the niece in it as an older, like a different actress, because she's older now,
Right.
but then she has a daughter who is the same. I was like, whatever, man. Like I was like, let's wrap it up. Like just like yeah, I don't
Like,
know.
don't you get, did you get to the point where you're just like, what's the point of all of this? Like, I don't,
Yeah. Which then again, over the head. They hit it. They hit you over the head with it, which is it's the destination of the journey. Like, sure, okay, like I okay, and then again, and then the last shot cuts back
right. I
to
forgot. To her,
her in
like
um
interrogation, basically. Right.
interrogation or whatever, and I'm like, oh yeah, right. It started okay. Like I don't get it. Like it's just like whatever.
And
And again, I say all that because I want to see the movie again. I want to
yeah.
appreciate it more, or appreciate it again, because there's so much greatness in it. Um, but and I would love to now that I know what's going to happen in the last act and the
Right.
epilogue, like I'd love
Right.
to be able to try to appreciate it more. But again, again, listening to the Big Picture podcast, our favorite podcast, as they pointed out, most people will only see this once,
Yeah.
and
And I
you
might be one
can't,
of them.
and you can't do that. Like if you're asking people to make a almost 4 hour commitment and you've got them once,
Hmm.
why intentionally leave
Hmm.
them unsatisfied? If the point is supposed to be something deeper
Hmm.
and not just, anyways. So I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me, and it's very disappointing, and it's just unfortunate. So we can end there.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I mean, I'm sure some people would be like, I loved it. And Sophie is the framing device for seeing the whole movie, but, and it's open to all these things, but I don't know. I feel like he was telling like the same old story in a very unique way. And the way some of those actions took place in the third act, it was like, I've seen this 58 times.
Mhm.
So it actually takes away its amazing uniqueness. So,
Right. Yeah.
all right, man, you have time for quick scores, like your
Yeah.
score?
Do the FOF rating.
Let's do it, man. I just want to say real quick, like we really like this movie.
Yeah.
We tore it apart, but like, yeah, the
Yeah.
VistaVision thing was a little on the nose. They haven't shot something from since the 50s like that, but it captures the vast structure of Toss Mine and these landscapes and all this sort of stuff. Um,
Well,
the
these are the movies that hurt the most.
right,
This is the thing. These are the movies that hurt the most when there's so much potential, and in this case, when so much of that, so when the majority of that potential is actually achieved and captured on screen, and then
yep,
30% of it is wasted or misfired or mishandled or whatever,
mhm,
like that it's the great works with the most potential that hurt the most, and for me at least, that's when I often will rate them the harshest.
yeah,
But here's the thing, again, despite what I've gone on for, my FOF rating
hmm,
for the Brutalist is 4.0. Like I can't go below that.
yeah,
I can't really go above that, but I really can't. 4.4 out of 5 stars is really where I have to stay, because again, there's so much greatness, and there's
yeah,
like there's almost 3 hours of greatness.
yeah, yeah,
Like I can't deny that.
yeah,
And so I mean, that's where I land. And even though it sounds like I wouldn't go anywhere near that high of a rating, it is great. It is great. It's just
yeah.
incredibly frustrating as well.
Right. No, dude, we're in the same. I like my score is 4.1. And it's the same thing. I mean, these are two of the best performances of the year, of like maybe of the decade. I mean, and yeah, like again, I think Jones has her great moments too. And the Zofia character is good. Joe Alwyn's good. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's well
I
written.
won't be mad. Like here's the thing. The only Oscar I will be upset if it wins is Best Picture.
Yeah.
If it wins every other Oscar it's nominated for, I'll be happy,
Mhm.
because it deserves the recognition. But if it wins Best Picture, I will be disappointed or upset.
Yeah. Yep, yep, yep. So yeah, I mean, I think we hit it, man. I think that is about all. That is at least, like you said, that this is a film that bears the weight of significant discussion, and that in itself points to almost an epic achievement. And that's what I'm saying. Like, just let it ride, dude. Make your movie. Like, you don't have to look at this, like a neon sign. But I think, and I think the epilogue kind of does that a little bit. It's like a way of, it's like a little like self-masturbatory, but it's a good flick. It's a good flick with a lot of great stuff. So, all right, you guys got to let us know your thoughts in the comments. I'm sure some brutal boys are really pissed right now, and we want to hear from you. And maybe you saw something we didn't, or you picked something up in the third act we didn't. But hey, Kleiner, thank you for coming along for this ride. It's been fun to do this. We'll do it again soon. And for Adam, I am Nick Furman. This is Furman on Film. Stay firm, my friends.